Hello everyone and welcome to the Meghji Project. Today we have a very exciting interview with Orlando Clayton Taylor, who is a managing director at Deloitte Consulting. And I'm really honored today to show you his outstanding commitment to the Black community and also tell you a little bit about his career. Additionally, he has obtained an elite education at MIT Sloan School of Business, and where he participated in student government. So for anybody who's interested in applying to MIT or just interested in the school in general, that will probably be a pretty interesting perspective to hear about. And of course, for those who aren't, I still think that he has an incredibly unique story that I think you'll enjoy either way. I also wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that our website is up and running. On there you can see all the interviews that we've had and also the next few interviews that we have in store. Our collaborators are also listed on this page, so I really recommend you to go take a look. Additionally, if you want to get involved in the Meghji project in any way, I would also recommend that you visit our website because it has all our contact information stored there. Last but not least, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you're enjoying this content. This is going to be a fun one, so make sure to stay tuned. Enjoy. Tell me a little bit about how you grew up and what your early life was like, and how did that kind of steer you towards business and consulting?
That's interesting. My growing up is like it's a long story. I'll try to summarize it, but it did have an influence on kind of where I am now. I grew up in Maryland, but for a while I lived in Southeast Asia. And actually, I was born in DC. Born in DC, but never really lived there until later in life. Mostly raised in Maryland, a little while in Southeast Asia. Grew up in the suburbs, but it was during a time where there weren't as many people of color in the suburbs. So most of our like cultural activities, whether it be like trying to eat traditional food or going out or going to like the inner harbor or cultural things, they were all in the cities. So it's funny, even though I grew up in the cities and cities were very different from where they are now. It was much more challenging. I just kind of developed a fondness for some of the sense of community that I had seen in cities, even though I grew up in the suburbs. But that all gets me to kind of here. I always had an interest in living in a big city, and this is very strange and roundabout concept, but I had some exposure just randomly and through social ties to mergers and acquisitions, and M&A many times is, especially back when I first started, it was mainly focused and housed in the bigger cities. And I wanted to live in a big city, and I met a few people who were in M&A and were doing that type of work, and I just got along with them in terms of personality, likes, dislikes, um, desire to live in a big city, and that kind of influenced my career decision. Um, the part in between I didn't mention is M&A. I look at M&A, especially on the consulting side. I do look at it as kind of like you're putting together all the puzzles. So I'll kind of oversimplify it. Bankers help raise money, sometimes potentially find targets. Lawyers draft the paperwork. But when there's an M&A deal where the company is either being split apart, carved out, or two companies are being merged or integrating, consultants in M&A, we're the ones who actually come in who combine the operations of the company to derive synergies through efficiencies and cost reductions or split it out. Um, the reason M&A appealed to me, in addition to some of the personalities in M&A and the geographical peculiarities of M&A, is I was always like one of those kids who was like, like kind of organizer, student government, organizing class events, which is all like getting together a coalition and putting together the pieces of the puzzle. And there are a lot of similarities in M&A with that. So I guess to wrap up, like to how where I grew up, how it ties to M&A is one is again the putting together the pieces of the puzzle, and then just that desire to live in a big city, fast-paced life, which is pretty much very very synonymous with M&A.
Mhm. And you said you lived in Southeast Asia for some time. What was that like?
Um, it was pretty. My parents were a lot younger then, so they weren't we weren't going to any kind of private schools or anything like that. That's for sure. I think we even lived in town. It was interesting. It was a great cultural experience. You're around people not just from that region, but other parts of the world. So that was a great experience. Because at a very early age, I realized, the world is more than just the United States. It's more than just DC and Maryland. So that was a great experience.
Mhm. And so in terms of consulting, could you give like maybe a brief description of what it kind of entails?
It's true. So consulting is a ton of things, but I'm going to focus, and it's so many things we can never cover in a call. So I'm going to talk about mergers and acquisitions, M&A consulting. And what it is like I say, when an investment banker has identified a target, they raise money to 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 acquire the target. Lawyers have drawn up a lot of the paperwork, but all of a sudden, after all that is done, we call like the real work really has to begin. So there is something called like a sign to close period where it's before you've actually closed the deal, where you've signed documents that you want to do a deal, but the deal hasn't been 100% closed. And closed meaning you've wired all the money, signed all the final documents, legal ownership of the company has been executed. There's something called a sign to close period. During that period, consultants are very, very involved and pretty much driving the process. So what we're doing, let's say if there's a carve out. Um, so let's say I'm representing a private equity firm that's buying a division of a business. During that carve out time, my job is to understand how that business that's being carved out or divested, how entangled or how dependent it is upon the parent for services. Services meaning HR, IT, finance, procurement, legal, all of those support services, and even the front office sales force. And what consultants do is we look at each of those functions, not just from a functional basis, but all the way down to individual people and headcount, individual technology systems, and understand which of those people, processes, and technology are dependent upon the parent, which of those are completely within the business unit that's going to be sold, and which of those are a mix. And then what we need to understand is by the time we actually close the deal, meaning all the money has been sent across and the legal ownership of the business has changed hands, can this divested target operate by itself, or could it be cut out of the parent company where it currently resides and integrated into another portfolio company within a private equity shop? So we're looking at the people, the processes, the technologies. We're understanding where the entanglements lie. We're looking at, okay, things that are relied upon in the parent, but well, how do we stand those up? So for instance, let's say their HR information system is provided by the parent. Okay, well, how do we get a new instance of the HR information system set up by the time that we actually close so that the target or this business being carved out can operate on its own? So it's kind of complicated. It is very complicated, but that's the nuance of it is looking at all the operational and strategic implications for operating a carved out business on its own. And
Mhm.
the opposite situation might be integrating two businesses together. It's the same thing, but then you're trying to figure out, do I need two? Do I need two SAP systems? Do I need one? Do I need two HR systems? Do I need two CHROs? Do I need two CFOs? And the answer is usually no. So you have to determine how to actually combine and integrate these entities into each other.
Got it. And in terms of the day of the life, what does that look like for you?
It's funny, every day is very, very different. And I can tell you it varies by level. Um, very, very junior in this type of work. M&A on the East Coast tends to start a little later, like 9:30. But let's say you're on site at a client for many, many, many years. Every Monday, you would fly out to the client site, and on Thursday night, you'd come home. Now, sometimes there's variation to that now after COVID with Zoom. Some things are done more remotely. So day starts out, you fly out to the client Monday morning. You meet with your internal consulting team in the team room, and you would kind of map out what the week looks like. And the day would start out with oftentimes, functional meetings with each of the representative functions for the company that's being bought or sold. So you'd have round robin meetings with the HR team, the IT team, the finance team, and you have something that you developed earlier on in the process, like it's called a work plan. And you'd be reviewing and opining upon, the process, how the work plan is moving along in terms of one, either integrating the company or splitting the company out if it's a carve out. So you're going day by day through all the steps within the work plan. And then what you're doing is you're looking for risk. So that's like the start of the day. Monday, you fly in, you're meeting with your team. Then you're going to discuss about and talk about which of the different functional and strategic meetings you have for the day. And in those meetings, a big part of that will be understanding how you're progressing in terms of a work plan to how you can actually carve out that divested business or integrate two businesses together. And then the other piece you're going to be discussing is something called readiness. It's like there's a really, really detailed multiple thousand line testing regime, believe it or not, that goes on. Anytime somebody carves out and buys a business or two businesses are integrated, there's like mock simulations and testing. Some of that on the IT side is potentially AI driven. Others is literally using test data, something called penny testing. See how the pennies run through the system. We'll do mock closes. There's all types of testing involved. So that's the other thing you'll be doing every day is you will be monitoring and reviewing how you're progressing to passing all those tests, but also resolving any issues, determining if you have to change the strategy for which, when you'd actually like to divest the business or how you'd like to, integrate the business. So it's like an iterative process. You move through that work plan day over day, week over week. You're working with sometimes the CEO, the CFO. You're working with the heads of different functions. And eventually, after several weeks of iterating through the work plan, you get to this whole thing called readiness. And it's like go or no go type decision based upon some very, very detailed testing for all the things that would need to happen to allow a company to operate on its own or to integrate two companies together.
Mm-hmm. And you said that you've met with like the IT teams and the finance teams of different companies. Would you say that you had to be like well-versed in a bunch of different fields? And kind of how do you get those like different perspectives on so many different topics?
See, that's what's really tough about consulting. It's like they don't teach this skill in business school. You go to law school and you can learn about M&A law. You go to business school and you can learn, a decent amount about investment banking, but they don't teach consulting. So you're right. You do have to have, so for me, my role is I lead the overall projects. So I'm like the core team, but then sometimes I will actually lead a procurement specialist work stream or the legal specialist work stream. But let's say I'm on the core team. You do have to have, you're right, good question. You do have to have some understanding of IT and operational finance, even HR. You have to have a decent amount of understanding of that. But what we do with Deloitte is one of the reasons we've expanded so well into M&A is because we have experts in every functional area who can go deep, fifth level questions on any topic for IT, HR, finance, procurement, anything that you can think of. So what our structure will be, we'll have a core team who knows a decent amount about, they'll know, the core team will be very deep in M&A, but then they'll know a decent amount about all the different surrounding functions. And it'll also be deep in M&A strategy too. So they'll be deep in M&A strategy, M&A operations, mid-level understanding of functional requirements, but then we supplement that team with deep functional experts for each of the functional areas. And then in addition to the functional areas, we also have an industry expert too, which is called a subject matter expert.
So it's kind of like leading all these different parts that kind of have a little bit more expertise on each individual subject.
That's right. That's a smart way to characterize that. And that's why I mentioned, like, all of my life, I've kind of been the person kind of putting the pieces of the puzzle together. And that's why this is the type of field that I chose, and I enjoy it because it pings upon different personal likes and dislikes, and also my personality.
And I wanted to ask you about the traveling. So you said sometimes you get there on Monday and you leave by Thursday. Does that ever get like a lot, all that traveling week to week, being in a
It's
different
very,
place?
it's very, very, very tough, very, very demanding field. I can tell you a long time ago, like in the 90s, they would leave on Sunday and come back Friday after the last client went home. So it's way better than back then. I don't know if I could have done that consulting back in those days. It's very challenging. The hours can be long, and the hours can be intense because it's a mix of understanding the strategy of operating the business, but you're also down in the deep technicals in the analytics and financial modeling. So it's a little bit of you're a strategy advisor, but you're also a financial advisor too. So it can be very challenging, but it can be very rewarding. Especially it's a people business. It's not for everybody, but what makes it easier is if you enjoy the people you're around. We're very purposeful. Making time for after work events, going out to dinner, going out to happy hour, even sometimes entertainment trips. Going to a basketball, an NBA game or an NFL game with the team. Sometimes with just your client, your team, and sometimes even with the client. So it's definitely not a work all the time type of thing because people are just burn out. They're not going to be efficient, and they spend all this money to hire and retain the best and the brightest. You don't want to just work in the death. That's not a good business model. So I mean, leadership, we're very, very aware of how demanding it is. So we purposely try to do things to make it much more manageable. Like in addition to like my client service work, I'm the local office champion for the tri-state region, which is New York, Connecticut, and near Jersey, like North Jersey. And I'm essentially in charge of culture communications, and special events for the region. And it's just to maintain culture, connectivity, entertainment, sense of well-being for our people because we're a people business and we can't have people burning out. That's just not a smart business model.
And would you say more of those fun things kind of come in like the more senior you get in the role, and when you're first starting out, it's like very intense?
It's very intense, but believe it or not, you get more busy as you get more senior. You get a different type of busy.
Mm.
Those fun things are definitely for the junior folks because they need a breather, they need a break. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, so I'm used to it. But everybody is not made the same. So the junior folks are definitely involved in a lot of those events. I mean, some of them, they're literally, we're renting out a whole like rooftop happy hour spots. I'm not sure what they would be in Atlanta, but we'll rent out the whole thing and just have a party for our junior people.
Yeah.
It's just like they're going out on their own, except that they're not paying for it. The firm's paying for it, but it's to build community and camaraderie and to allow people to blow off steam. So no, the junior folks definitely get to do some of the fun things. Now it is intense for them, but it's a very collaborative environment. It's not only for the senior people.